The categories covered in this video include number 1, sliding turns, number 2, donuts, number 3, turning and sliding on slopes, number 4, those nasty steep ruts, number 5, hill climbs, number 6, pop goes a wheelie, number 7, trail popping, number 8, log hopping, number 9, whoops, and number 10, jumps. In the beginning, there was a fascination for anything that moved with energy coming from a man. As time passed on, creations came from the genius of man, which enabled men to be moved by an energy source other than their own kind. These creations would move at the will of their master, with a power and speed known to no dead or living man. The only obstacle to their beauty and magnificence would be the natural laws of Mother Nature. In order for the master and his creation to live in harmony with the natural laws of Mother Nature, he would first have to understand the laws of motion. At the near end of the 20th century, these masters would be called riders, and these creations called ATVs. To you riders, we here at ATV Solutions will guide you through these laws of motion, which will help you master different terrain riding styles, help you ride like a professional, help you have more fun, and help you get more out of your ATV. Turning, one of the most basic yet essential parts of the ride. To turn is to change position, not just to move the handlebar left or right. In these clips, you are witnessing turning in its complete meaning. Sliding is one of the most effective ways to turn. As you can see here, sliding occurs when the rider allows for the rear tires to lose their grip on the surface. He does this by applying gas to the machine right before and during the turn. Sliding turns have to be taken seriously. The rider must position his body forward and lean into the inside of the turn. He is positioning his body so that both him and the ATV will stay level with the surface. He does this by leaning his whole body into the turn. He also is positioning most of his weight toward the front of the ATV. This is because an ATV turning with velocity will send the weight of the rider to the outside of the machine. In a case where the rider was to ignore the result of this type of motion, he would be in danger of tipping over. One of the most popular type of slide is the donut. The slide must rotate continually and pivot around the left front tire or front right tire, depending if the rider is turning to the right or left. The rider must position his body in toward the front of the ATV in order to lighten up the rear of the ATV and allow it to slide with ease. The rider must not forget to also lean into the inside of the turn and to keep himself there until he has stopped his slide. The rider must give the engine gas continuously without any hesitation. If he does hesitate, his ATV will fail to slide. A reminder, when doing donuts, it is very hard to avoid being ambushed with dirt, as you can well see. The surface of the ground is a plane which is not always level with the earth. When turning on banks and on steep hills, the goal is to stay level with that surface, even if it's a 45-degree angle. Gravity's job is to pull things vertically down. If an ATV and rider are sitting still on a severe slope, gravity will use the ATV and rider as leverage, forcing them to tip over and roll down the hill. But if they have sufficient constant velocity, the ATV and rider can safely travel up and down a severe slope. The rider seen here is traveling with a great enough velocity to balance out the force of gravity. There is so much momentum and energy when an object is moving that in this case, when the ATV is turning on the slope, all the energy is pushing the ATV in the uphill direction. Gravity is pulling it downhill, and the ATV's force is pushing it uphill. Both forces are canceling. This is why such a maneuver is possible. Now, some would say that ruts are a plague to the land, yet others would say that they're a blessing. After we face the fact that ruts will be with us always, let us learn to conquer them. They are intimidating and seem impossible, but are very simple to maneuver over. The main ingredients are sufficient and constant velocity and weight distribution. The rider seen here must first approach the rut with sufficient speed. Secondly, he must position his body up so, when he encounters the slope, he may be able to stand on his pegs and allow for the handlebars to move up in close to his chest. These movements stop gravity from using any part of the rider and ATV as extra leverage to force a tip over. These movements are essential in order to execute a successful maneuver over a rut. Steep climbs can be found just about anywhere in the world. Though they may vary in distance and severity, hill climbs will always challenge both the ATV and the rider. The secret to hill climbs is simple: momentum. This has everything to do with Newton's first law of motion. Once an object is in motion, it will continue in a straight line unless it is acted on by an opposite and equal force. The force which will be needed to stop something in motion is much greater than a force needed to stop an object at rest. Therefore, if the ATV and rider stop in the middle of the hill climb, it will not take much for gravity and loose rocks to stop the rider in his tracks. Therefore, he needs to execute the incline with sufficient speed in order to create his momentum, and to keep his ATV at a constant speed in order to keep it. A safety precaution when hill climbing. If you ever come to a stop in the middle of a climb, make sure to never put on your rear brakes so as to lock them. If you do so, your front end will come up and your ATV will roll. It is best to squeeze your front brake lever firmly and to slightly push down on your rear brakes without locking them up. Again, never ever lock up your rear brakes on any hill climb. The wheelie is one of the most fun and enjoyable maneuvers that a rider can perform. When attempting a wheelie, the rider must first find himself some level ground. The motion and concept are really simple. The objective is to get from being balanced on 4 tires to being balanced on 2. Timing is crucial in order to execute this maneuver. The rider must be able to time his clutch release with the throttle and body movement. Everything must be done precisely at the same time. The rider must rock his body back, causing a force to be acting downward in the rear of the ATV. Giving it gas at the same time while releasing the clutch will cause the front end to come up. Once the front end is up, he must keep it there. The rider must imagine a straight line going straight down the middle of the ATV and the rider. This imaginary straight line must cut the weight of the rider and ATV into 2 equal halves. Once the rider is balanced, it is very important for him not to make any sudden movements with his body. It is also very important for the rider to let up on the gas once he is balanced. There's very little gas needed in order to do a wheelie. Similarly, there is very little speed required to be balanced. This sums up to the requirements for doing a wheelie. So just sit back, relax, and balance. Trails are full of those one or two annoying bumps that are always in our way. We usually take their abuse by letting them bounce us around. There is a solution to that problem, and it entails the wheelie maneuver. The rider must do one of two things. One, he can pop up the front end before he encounters the first bump, so that he can absorb it and prepare for the second bump. Second, he can ride over the first bump and pop up his front end as he tops out on it, so he'll be able to absorb the second bump. By doing one of these two maneuvers, the rider can optimize his fun on the trail, while at the same time he saves his body and ATV from abuse. When most of us ride on forest trails, there are a lot of obstacles in our way. Fallen trees are one way Mother Nature sends her wrath. Trees usually fall during a harsh winter and are unburied as the snow melts in the spring. ATV riders will usually find them laying in their path and will try to find some alternative route. We don't like to waste our gas by going around them, so we found out a way to go over them. Seen here, the rider is simply using the wheelie maneuver and applying a couple of additional moves. Once he pops up his front end, he is preparing for contact on the log. Once contact is made, the rider needs to distribute all of his weight to the front end of the ATV. He does this by leaning forward, and his chest should be close to the handlebars. Now that there is more weight in the front of the ATV than the rear, the front end will drop, and the ATV will pivot over the log. Once the front tires hit the ground, the rider must now distribute all of his weight to the rear of the ATV. If he does not do this, he will find it very hard to get traction on the rear tires. The entire movement should flow without any hesitation. Once the front end is up over the log, there is no stopping, because this maneuver requires a great deal of momentum. The momentum is carrying the stored energy, which will help the ATV and rider to pivot and move over the log. You all know what it is like to encounter one or two bumps. Can you imagine 50 of them? We've all probably seen ATV races before, so we all should know the section of the race course dedicated to the whoop section. Obviously, there is no race course whoops in the wild country, but I guarantee you that you will run into something very similar in your riding life. If you want to go slow and soak in the bumps, that's more than fine. But if you'd like to get through them in a hurry, the trick is simple. In order to get through these nasty little bumps, the rider needs to push the throttle back, gain some speed, and situate his body toward the rear. He needs to let the ATV do most of the work by letting the suspension do the work. The rider must make sure to make every move gradual, whether it be changing his speed, body position, or braking. Most everyone loves to catch air. The fact is that most riders don't know how to catch air properly. This because the meaning of jump is to be free from the ground with no attachments to it. If there is nothing solid to keep the ATV and rider steady, what can be done to control them in the air? The objective of the rider is to have the ATV land on all fours. Remember that a motorcycle can land many different ways because it only has 2 tires. An ATV is much more difficult to maneuver because of its size and weight. When attempting a jump, the rider must no longer think of himself as a rider, but instead as a pilot. He must be able to do 3 things: take off, fly straight, and land. The takeoff is probably the most important because the takeoff is going to really determine how the ATV is going to fly and land. He must first take into consideration the degree of slope that he will be taking off on. In order to level out in the middle of the jump, he must be able to prepare all of his body weight beforehand. He must also consider his speed before he hits the jump. The rider must remember to lean back before the jump, to keep on the gas while in the air, and to avoid too much weight in the back or front. If he lands in the rear, that means there is either too much weight in the back or he is giving too much throttle. A way to get out of this mess is to move the body forward on the ATV and to put on the brakes in the middle of the air. Just before he lands, he will want to resume the throttle to avoid a sluggish landing. If the ATV is endoing in the middle of the air, the rider is either too forward on the ATV or is not giving it enough or any gas. He should lean back and give it plenty of gas to recover and prepare for landing. ATV Solutions is proud to have brought you these tips and tricks. We hope that you'll always be safe on your rides and realize that everything you do is at your own risk. We hope that you'll hear from us soon. Until next time, ride on!